Things have been pretty good for me recently. Long-time viewers of my channel will know that the start of this decade took a significant toll on my mental health. I found myself overwhelmed with this sense of grey. I struggled to leave the house whenever the sky was overcast. Things are better now. We're allowed outside. I live in a different place. I go to places like this. I allow myself to explore the countryside simply because I want to be bathed in sunlight. But there are times when I find myself feeling guilty. I may be in a good place, but the world is not. Temperatures are soaring. The far right is on the up across Europe. Normal people are being treated as vermin simply for wanting to come from over there to over here. It feels somewhat hypocritical to think to myself, yeah, I'm okay, when I look out at the world and see such devastation and hatred. I don't think it's surprising that so many people are in denial about the state we find ourselves in. When an existential threat like this is looming so large, it's very easy to just stick your head in the sand and pretend things are okay. Perhaps the threat of climate or military annihilation is just too great for some people to bear. And that's okay. After all, you can come somewhere like this and look out over rolling countryside and bask in sunlight and think things might be okay, even just for a moment. When I first played The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, I was immediately drawn to the islands in the sky. It was exciting to experience something completely fresh, an area with new systems and mechanics. The Sky Islands were gorgeous, drenched in yellow sunlight, calm, contemplative woodwinds playing restrained chords in the background. The Great Sky Island, which introduces the game, is nothing but an enormous floating rock, populated only by exotic wildlife, long-thought extinct fish, and ancient Hyrulean Zonai constructs. I quickly found myself feeling the same sense of overwhelming freedom I felt when I first played its predecessor, Breath of the Wild. I could go anywhere, climb anything my stamina allowed, and use whatever means necessary to complete the puzzles scattered around the floating archipelago. It wasn't long though before I realised that there's a loneliness to the Great Sky Island. The surface of Hyrule is obscured by clouds, the ghost of its first king, the only person Link has to talk to. Of course, I was having a good time. I was learning the new abilities I had at my disposal. I was building boats out of fallen wood and discarded Zonai fans, but I was acutely aware that I was alone. When the time bell rings every evening and the worker constructs begin their daily hibernation, the sudden silence is very apparent. On my first night, this silence gave me time to contemplate the new part of the familiar world I was in. Link was here for a reason, and I had to make sure he completed his task and saved his princess. I spent a few hours on the Great Sky Island. I wanted to explore as much as I could because I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to return once I'd left. I became enamoured with my environment, the sounds of the birds, the softly swaying trees, the all-encompassing golden sunlight. By the time the clouds parted and I saw the kingdom of Hyrule below me, it was difficult to bring myself to jump. If I hadn't have played Breath of the Wild and Zelda hadn't endeared herself so much to me throughout my playthrough of that game, I possibly wouldn't have jumped at all. I would have spent hours on the islands in the sky. It felt surreal, landing back on the surface of Hyrule. I had spent so much time in Breath of the Wild that I assumed I would immediately recognise every hillock and wood. Of course, I didn't. The game world is truly enormous, and despite having largely the same topography, the world of Tears of the Kingdom has an abundance of changes from its predecessor. I quickly made my way to Lookout Landing, Pura and Robbie, glad to see some faces I recognised. I was suddenly back in the place I remembered. The world of Hyrule is vast and beautiful, and I couldn't wait to see what surprises it had in store for me. I explored the immediate area, received the paraglider, and was informed of what problems had beset the kingdom in Link's absence. It was only after I was fully released into the wilderness that I began to realise that something felt off about the world I'd come to regard so fondly. This is not a criticism of the game. I felt no ludonarrative dissonance. I just felt as if the world of Hyrule was not right. While I was still full of joy and excitement exploring a game world so deeply intertwined with its mechanics and systems, the actual feel of Hyrule was different. But different how? It becomes very apparent early on that this is a different beast to Breath of the Wild. The first game was almost cute in its enemy design. Bokoblins have little pig noses, Lizalfos and Moblins dance at their campfires. Despite the game trying to tell you that they were evil monsters hell-bent on destroying civilization, it was hard not to feel a little guilty when you came back to the Great Plateau and obliterated every last one of them with your fully powered Master Sword. Tears of the Kingdom is the complete opposite in its design. I made a conscious effort to avoid any information about the game before its release, and my blindness resulted in some true moments of shock. The first time I saw a like, or a Horriblin, or a Gleeok, or a Gibdo, I thought I'd stumbled into a completely different game. Likes expose their bubonic insides when you hit them, Horriblins crawl giggling around the ceiling waiting to pounce, Gleeoks scream at you with 3 Sauron-like eyes. Strands of gloom pulse like they have a heartbeat, and their hands appear out of the floor trying to drag you into oblivion. The first time I saw Gloom Hands, I had no idea if they were even killable. I just knew I had to run. I fled until the sky stopped bleeding red and the hands retreated back into the ground. The calamities befalling the civilizations of Hyrule are far more existential than they have ever been. The Rito are running out of food in an eternal blizzard. The Goron are enveloped in what is essentially an opioid epidemic. Gerudo Town is completely abandoned by its inhabitants, overrun by evil skeletal monsters that fall from pulsating nests of sand. Tears of the Kingdom hammers in a message at every turn. The world may have been saved with the defeat of Calamity Ganon, but the threat of Ganondorf is far, far greater. A thought was beginning to fester in the back of my head. Zelda isn't coming back, is she? Tears of the Kingdom is going to break my heart, isn't it? The characters carry an air of desperation with everything they say. I remember Pura being completely convinced in the eventual victory for the forces of good when Link first met her on his quest to defeat Calamity Ganon. After the upheaval, she is struggling for that same vigour. Granted, she has more responsibility as the leader of Lookout Landing, but I could tell that the disappearance of Zelda and the sudden appearance of Gloom was having an effect on her. At first, it feels like there are no leads, only the sudden and cataclysmic dangers that the civilizations of Hyrule are facing. Her relief at the very sight of Link, after who knows how long, makes it very clear just how desperate the situation is. Even Sidon, who was almost blasé about the events of Breath of the Wild, finds himself in a state of near hopelessness and has to be brought round by his wife to start believing that things will be made right again. I made my way to Kakariko Village, one of my favourite locations in Hyrule. I wanted to find the first Great Fairy so I could start to upgrade my armour. I found Tears of the Kingdom to be much more difficult than its predecessor, so I needed to make sure I was at my peak if I wanted to survive. I found the village covered in ancient ruins that had fallen from the sky. There was no Great Fairy, the forest where she used to reside now almost completely overtaken by a yawning chasm of gloom. The land felt physically darker, as if the clouds never quite parted over the area. The seemingly eternal sunlight of the Great Sky Island felt like a distant memory that I had begun to forget. I was overwhelmed with such an exasperated need to make things right in this land so shaken by upheaval. I began to wonder if there was any hope at all, or whether it would be this for my entire playthrough. Desperation, despair, defeat. Until... It took me a long time to realise that the transition from the surface to the sky was as simple as making something that could lift Link up. I thought that the Sky Islands would be their own specific instanced areas, like the Divine Beasts were in Breath of the Wild. It was only when I created my first hot air balloon, clumsily attached a lit torch to its frame, and floated into the sky that I realised the world just keeps going up here. I ascended to the archipelago in the sky above Kakariko Village, and suddenly I came to understand that the feeling of joy and wonder I had all but forgotten was here all along. The sun was back in its unfiltered glory, the quiet woodwinds graced my ears again, the birds were gliding around my head, unfazed by my existence. The islands in the sky are a respite from what happens below, a place of isolated peace, where Link only has to worry about the puzzles he is presented with in order to purify his body of gloom. I found myself intent on exploring every island archipelago. I wanted to discover their secrets, best their challenges, climb their astonishing heights. But every time I ascended to somewhere new, I would look over the edge of the rocks suspended in the sky and see the devastation that the two apocalypses had caused. I found myself feeling guilty for using this place, somewhere only Link could reach, as a shelter from Ganondorf. If nobody else could use these islands, why was it fair that I could? I could still see the ruins of market towns destroyed by Calamity Ganon and his malice. I could still see Hyrule Castle floating on a bed of black fire as if taunting me from afar. Not even up here could I escape the spectre of evil. And yet, I still made the pilgrimage to the sky as often as I could, in spite of this obligation to play my part on the surface. I still needed time to breathe, to take in the sunlight and, in a purely practical sense, prepare for the battles ahead by completing the shrine quests in the sky. And I still took the time to look over the edge and take in Hyrule from above. It was up here on the archipelago over Necluda that I saw a place I'd somehow managed to forget. My favourite place in all of Breath of the Wild. I kicked myself for not heading there immediately after the game began and jumped, en route to where Link once called his home. Hateno Village was special to me when I played Breath of the Wild. It was practically untouched by Calamity Ganon, a tiny hamlet of homes nestled far away from all the death and devastation he had caused. It was a reminder of what once was, a window into Hyrule before the apocalypse. A building company made an effort to welcome new inhabitants into the village. A friendly, if eccentric man wanted nothing more than to dye clothes. It was peaceful, homely, warm. It was where I returned when I wanted to break. I would simply climb to the roof of Pura and Robbie's tech lab and sit, watching the sun rise and set over verdant green hills. As I was diving towards Hateno Village, I was worried that it would be like Kakariko. Unable to hide from the upheaval, tinged with gloom, its residents burdened with the same malaise that seemed to hang over everyone else in Hyrule. But it wasn't. Hateno was still here, its soundtrack still flanked by xylophones and uilleann pipes, still somehow removed from everything wrong with the world. It was not without its own problems, however. I never thought I would get so invested in a mayoral election within a Zelda game. It sounds ridiculous, and I guess it kinda is, that there would even be an election cast between an uptight but well-meaning politician and a radical fashionista in a Zelda game. But I found myself lost in the little details of what is probably the most exciting moment in all of Hateno Village's history. I meticulously went around the village, handing out mushrooms to those without mushrooms, following Reed and Cece to find out what their secrets were. After so many hours of unrelenting adversity, to be part of something as relatively trivial as an election lifted a weight off my shoulders. It felt decidedly human. News of the upheaval must have reached Hateno Village. There is an entire archipelago floating above its buildings, but for now, the residents of this little village in Necluda must focus on what is most pressing, and that is their election. In the end, the race concludes as amicably as possible. Cece and Reed accept their shortcomings and shared stubbornness, and agree to work together. And I just couldn't stop myself smiling when I watched them give their joint victory speeches. And then it was over, and Hateno Village went back to being a quiet village in Necluda. I never spent much time in Tarrytown when I first explored Hyrule in 2017. I visited Akala so late that I almost treated it as an afterthought, an entire questline ending with a marriage that could be completely missed if Link didn't build his house in Hateno. It was only after I completed the game that I heard about this story, but it's never the same if you don't witness it firsthand. I made sure not to make the same mistake when playing Tears of the Kingdom. Akala is a far less dangerous place than it was during the Calamity, and I felt confident to approach the once treacherous highlands and visit the town that had passed me by in the past. Almost immediately, I met Ronson and Hudson and their daughter Mattison, and once again, I was drawn into a little slice of life that was just so human. Mattison, a Gerudo child, is due to head to the birthplace of her mother in the desert. Her father wants to organise a big send-off but can't do it alone. So what better job for the hero of Hyrule than to help father and daughter with their needs before Mattison heads off to Gerudo Town. The quest in terms of gameplay is trivial. You need to block someone's eyesight. You need to find 10 Sunderlions so a balloon can be dyed yellow. And that's it. You hand the Sunderlions to Hudson, he and his daughter build and dye the balloon, and then the Gerudo chaperone arrives. But when you think your quest will be complete and you'll be free to head on your way, Hudson has a final request. This time, Link is not alone in the sky, and he is there to witness a beautiful moment between a couple and their child. In Tarrytown, there are important pieces of business to attend to. The construction site at the bottom of the hill is Hudson's most pressing concern, but these don't really matter. The apocalypse may be looming, with the previous calamity still in recent memory, but that doesn't stop families finding each other. It doesn't stop little girls growing up. After Mattison departed for Gerudo Town, I made myself another hot air balloon. I felt compelled to return to the sky again, only this time things were a little different. I found a platform with a small circular pool of water and looked out over Hyrule like I so often found myself doing. This time though, I didn't feel guilty for being up here on my own. I didn't feel like I was wasting time, I didn't feel like I was overwhelmed with desperation or despair. I travelled to the Great Sky Island again, for perhaps the first time since I had left, and stood on the platform where Link first dives down to the surface. I cast my eye over my surroundings and took in what I could see. Yes, there was Hyrule Castle, its black flame ever present on the horizon. I could see Akala Citadel, one of the last bastions of pre-Calamity Hyrule, still in ruins to the northeast. I could see countless chasms and innumerable areas I knew housed Gleoks and Lynels and Hinoxes, all of them reminders of what could still yet come to pass. But I could also see Lookout Landing. I could see Gerudo Town in the distant southwest. I could even just about see Hateno Village, tucked away in its quiet corner of Necluda. The world of Hyrule was clouded in more darkness than ever before, but when gazing over the landscape, I was reminded that it was also full of life, full of humanity. It feels so intimate, being able to involve yourself in the lives of normal people. Cece and Reed aren't destined to save the world. They're not going to fight Ganondorf and his armies of monsters. Mattison is not a great warrior queen in waiting. She's just a girl. And Cece and Reed are just people. I found comfort in this knowledge, that the people of Hyrule were still there despite everything. And if ever I felt that things were overwhelming, that Ganondorf would prove too strong or Zelda might not return, I would go back to my islands in the sky and feel at home there, looking over the places I'd been and thinking of the people I'd met. They will still be there, no matter how long I stay here, and I can take solace in that, here in the islands in the sky. I come to places like this for a number of reasons. I like to explore. I don't want to stay in the same familiar surroundings all my life. I like to take pictures of the pretty places I go to. But mostly, I come to places like this because I can pretend that things will be okay. I look up at trees, or across countryside, or out to sea, and think things might be alright in the end. Everything might just work out, and there will still be places to enjoy and explore. Whenever I come to places like this though, I'm left with an impression of humanity. A fence, a path, an old home, roots trodden into dirt, or stones placed before living memory. Even a place like this, where the trees are overtaking the paths and the fences are beginning to rot, will have signs of life long after I'm gone. And they have signs of life as long as I'm here. Normal, mundane, intimate people will be doing normal, mundane, intimate things for as long as there is life on this planet. In my playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom, I missed Link and Zelda's house. It slipped my mind, hidden away in its corner of Hateno Village. But when I was writing this script, I had a thought to find it. I was overjoyed with what I discovered. Zelda kept a journal detailing the people of Hyrule and their recovery from the calamity. She wrote, "The people's spirits were not broken. They and their strong wills are our greatest treasure. They are the ones who will rebuild." I think that's a good thing to remember.